Today's episode of Overdue Finds is brought to you by EPL's Forward Thinking Speaker Series. EPL is proud to present award-winning journalist and Seven Fallen Feathers author Tanya Talaga for the next Forward Thinking Speaker Series presentation on Wednesday, April 22nd. Tickets for her presentation, All Our Relations, Finding the Path Forward, will go on sale Wednesday, March 4th on Eventbrite starting at 10 a.m. Tickets for this event are just $5 each. Visit epl.ca/speaker series for more details. Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, are you as excited as I am today?
I can barely sit still.
I know. I've been thinking about this recording for the last couple of weeks. This is a project that we've worked on for... We put a fair amount of time into this, I want to say.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, and today, of course, we are talking all about the second annual EPL Overdue Finds March Madness Tournament.
Yay!
Yeah, insert air horn here.
I really want one, but I'm so tempted to make the sound, but when I do, it comes out as like pew pew pew, so that's not quite what we're going for.
Yeah. And then also today, too, if we sound a little bit different, today we're actually recording for the first time out of the Stanley A. Milner Library.
We're here.
We're almost in our new studio. Not quite. We're recording out of a boardroom.
Yes.
So if we sound a little bit echoey today, we'll just ask you to stay patient with us as we kind of make the transition into what will be an amazing facility here at Stanley A. Milner Library.
Yeah.
And joining us today to talk all about the excitement of the March Madness Tournament, please welcome back Nancy Shung, who was recently on our Best of 2019 episode. Nancy, welcome back.
Pew, pew, pew.
Yeah.
Nancy, we joked around with you last time that you only really ever appear on Overdue Finds when it's a best of year wrap-up episode. So we're so happy that we didn't have to wait a full calendar year to have you back on the show.
I am also very happy and delighted to be back.
Also joining us, we have a member of the Overdue Finds family, Maria Milanowski. Welcome.
Burr, 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 burr.
I
My
love
best air word.
I love that everyone is humoring me on this. It's great.
None of us are actually human. We're just sound boxes making sound effects.
Yeah.
I really wish that the recording studio has like a sound effects board for us.
I've heard a rumor that, I think we may have some sort of soundboard that we can use for sound effects. That's the rumor going around.
I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
we'll focus on that when we get in there. But Maria, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And Maria, you work on the EPL to go lit vans.
Yes.
So tell everybody, I guess, a little bit about what your role entails there.
For sure. So if you listen to the episode that featured Indy Randawa on it, he is literally my desk mate, so I work alongside Indy, and there's a team of 8 library assistants that are equipped with 4 vans that have a whole bunch of different programming materials on them, and we drive out to areas that are either underserved or far away from library branches, and we take the programming to them.
We may need to pause and define what lit van means. It may not mean what our audience think it means.
That's right, yeah. So explain a little bit, because it's not just like maybe people are thinking of it's like an old school bookmobile, and that's not it, right?
Yes, exactly. I've had to explain to my friends many a time that I don't drive a bookmobile, although they seem to like that name better, so I'm the bookmobile driver to them. But the literacy vans are equipped with all kinds of different programming material. So we've got storybooks, we have robots, we have Lego robots, we have just regular Lego, puppets, all kinds of things that you might need for a parent and toddler program, or a program you might take into a school, or even programs you might take into a senior's residence. So
that's awesome. I love the seniors component of that, and I've seen pictures, and I've heard stories about some of those visits, and I love those. And of course, as we mentioned, you are part of the Overdue Finds family. you actually helped create some of the lists that, of course, we talk about our show notes at the end of the episode. So you kind of get to hear the audio before it's released to the public, where it's me messing up on words and having to pause to take drinks of water. So you do an amazing job with that.
Oh, thanks.
All right. So before we get talking all about the excitement of this year's March Madness tournament, let's start off by sharing some of our recent Overdue finds. Maria, it's your first time on the show. What have you been enjoying recently?
Ooh, exciting. I have been reading a lot of YA and graphic novels for both teens and children recently because we've been working on a school-age services project. But there was one that I found recently that floored me. It's a children's graphic novel. It's called This Is Our Pact by Ryan Andrews. And it's a fantasy graphic novel that's kind of about a group of friends who every single year their town has a ceremony where they release lanterns into the river. And these boys have decided that this year they're going to follow the lanterns all the way to the end of the river, no matter how far it takes. And slowly, one by one, the boys in this group kind of peter off or decide that they need to go home, that their parents are going to be upset, until you're left with only 2 boys that really kind of follow through on their promises. And it's a story about friendship and kind of holding true to your pact, but also it has this, it has an almost kind of Studio Ghibli-esque sense of wonder about it, where the characters and the author get you to experience all of these wonderful things that are happening and they feel no reason to explain why. So it's a really, really great story, and I think that anyone of any age would really enjoy it if they're looking for something with a little bit of wonder in it.
Now, when you mentioned Studio Ghibli, you're talking about kind of the Miyazaki movies, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're thinking of Spirited Away
Yeah.
and My Friend Totoro, I believe?
Yeah.
Nice. Nancy, what have you been enjoying?
I have been playing this really great video game called Frostpunk, which is available in the EPL collections. It's essentially you lead a civilization post environmental disaster, like the title suggests. You are in a winter dystopia, and you have to lead your society to survive. It forces you to make some really tough decisions, though. So, for example, early on, you can enact a law called child labor. Plus side, you have more laborers to run your factories. Plus side, it's children, and sometimes they lose limbs, and that's not pleasant.
So I just want to clarify. I just want to clarify that would be the negative side.
You know, it's morally ambiguous enough because...
All right. Stand in your truth.
I'm bad enough of a player that if I don't use child labor, I don't have enough labor to survive, so we all die.
So the hard question.
Do we all die because I'm an incompetent leader, or do I force children into a life of misery, but we survive? I don't know. It's a good game, and you make a lot of hard questions like that.
So is that just on PlayStation, or is it on Xbox as well?
I have a PlayStation, and that's what I play it on. Mm-hmm. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if it's on Xbox. It's also available on PC, but I play it on PS4.
That sounds amazing, because most of those kind of like dystopian games, they all take place, like I'm thinking of like Borderlands or Mad Max or whatever. They all take place kind of in like, it's always like super hot. It's like the desert. So you don't really see that kind of survival game like when it's like in this frozen tundra, as you say.
Exactly. And the great thing is that, you have a generator in the middle, and again, it costs power and labor to run it. But you can also click on the individual people, and they'll tell you what their concerns are. And so sometimes I see my poor child laborers, saying, it's really cold. I'm like, well, work harder. Young Oliver twist.
That's right. Can I have more porridge, please?
There is no porridge.
Yeah, it's just gruel for all.
I do have gruel supplemented with sawdust, which is another choice you can make.
This game sounds amazing. It's funny because if it isn't available for Xbox, I've been thinking of a reason to get a PlayStation. That sounds like a good reason, actually. All it took was a game with child labor in it. Caroline, how about you?
I recently read a book called Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love by Dani Shapiro, who's written a number of memoirs, a number of books about her life. This one is about her experience of doing one of those online DNA tests, the ones that you see commercials for. And she submitted her sample. She was doing it. She and her half-sister wanted to see kind of what their genetic background was and if they were at risk for any specific diseases. And she gets the results back, and it says that she and her half-sister do not share a common ancestor, which means that her father was not her biological father. Mm-hmm. So she starts investigating, kind of pulling apart what this means. Both of her parents are deceased, and so she can't turn to them for questions, but she can look to the rest of her extended family. She can do some research into what may have happened, and it's one part about her experience in processing this information, but it's another part at just kind of looking at identity and who you are and how what you tell yourself about your own identity and all of those aspects of it. There's an element of it that really reminded me of the documentary Three Identical Strangers, which was about three men when they turned about 20, discovered that they were actually triplets who had been separated at birth and adopted out separately. And one day they just came face to face with someone who looked identical to them, and how their lives then spun and based on that discovery and their history. And so, yeah, this was just a really interesting, I couldn't put it down. It almost at times had like a thriller element to it, even though it wasn't. But this idea of like, what would you do if you're given information that changes how you think about yourself?
Yeah, well, that would be insane. I can't even imagine.
And I think it's probably happening pretty frequently with things. Maybe it's not as big as finding out one of your parents is not a biological contributor to who you are, but I think people are making discoveries based on some of these services that are now available and opening these boxes. And I think it'll just be an interesting kind of new frontier to see what that's like.
Yeah. It's also a little bit scary too, just sending your DNA away to like a private company, right?
Absolutely. So that gets touched on a little bit, but since they already made that decision, it mostly focuses on what came after.
Of course.
I had an experience like that once. I walked into a restaurant and there was a woman right across the room who looked exactly like me. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is my identical twin. And then a friend was like, that's a mirror, Nancy. I was 27.
I love that, like, you were ready for it, though. Like, you were ready to embrace.
My family history has enough holes in it that it could be plausible.
So keep an eye out for those mirrors.
That's right.
Bryce, what have you been enjoying?
I also have a video game recommendation this week. I thought it's funny because we're going to get into it in a little bit as we talk about our picks here for the March Madness tournament. But, we really tried to include video games in it, and we couldn't find a format that would work. So I'm going to recommend a game. And Nancy, I'd be shocked if you haven't played these games, the Overcooked games. So fun, so addictive. It's a great party game, or even something too you might want to play, like if you're a parent, maybe you have kids who are a little bit older, like maybe 9, 10, you're looking for a fun game to play with them. Either of the Overcooked games are great. Basically, the plot of the game is you control these like fun little cute cooks in a kitchen, and there's 2 of you or sometimes up to 4 of you, and basically what your job is you have a recipe that you need to make. You need to plate the recipe and then serve it to the people in a restaurant. You have a very limited amount of time.
Already I'm very stressed.
It's fun. I know it sounds stressful. As somebody who used to work in a restaurant, I was not too scarred by this game. But as you advance in the game, the levels become more difficult. The dishes there's more steps you need to do. So you have to like cut up the vegetables, maybe boil the water for the soup and that sort of thing, and plate everything and do dishes as well. So also as you move on, like the levels themselves become more of like a maze. So I think it's an Overcooked 1 and where you get to a level where you're between two moving semis. You have to like make your dish and then move it to the other truck, but you have to make sure the truck is lined up before you can move over. I know it sounds stressful.
I can't handle this.
These games are great. They did, however, last Christmas almost lead my family, who are all Overcooked fans, to a fist fight because half of us were preparing Christmas dinner while the other half were playing Overcooked. But the Overcooked half wouldn't help the Christmas dinner preparing half, and they kept on saying, but we're also cooking.
You're like, this is real life Overcooked. Maria, have you played these games?
I have played them. They are amazing. I remember the first time that I saw anyone playing them. We were at a party, so part of us were playing a board game. We were playing, whatever, I think it's Haunting on the House on the Hill?
Betrayal on the House on the Hill.
Betrayal on the House on the Hill, which is a fantastic game. And the other half of our friends were playing Overcooked. And I remember looking up because of the amount of shouting that was going on in the room. And I just see the people who are playing, like, pushing each other, yelling directions. Meanwhile, on the screen, something's on fire, like somebody's stuck in a corner. It was so funny. So I've played that game with my sisters before, and it's hilarious. I kind of sit back as they yell at each other.
Yeah, it's a blast. We have both Part 1 and 2 in our collection on both PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. I think for you Nintendo Switch owners, it's also available on that too that you can purchase. So most of us here are fans of it. Caroline is still a little stressed on it, but 3 of the 4 of us really recommend it. So. All right, so let's get to why we are here today. We, of course, are talking about March Madness. For the entire month of March, you can go to our Facebook and Twitter pages to vote on your choices for the best of the 2010s. So this is inspired by the NCAA basketball tournament. This tournament will determine the ultimate of the best of the best. So this year, instead of just all movies you're voting on, this year you're also voting on books, movies, TV, and music. So really the best of the last decade. We're hoping everybody will play along with us. So what you can do is you can download your own bracket at epl.ca/podcast. Basically fill in your bracket, take a photo of it, and share it on social media by using the hashtag EPL March Madness. And Caroline, you don't know about this, but I lined up an awesome prize for our listeners who will share their bracket on social media.
This just got even more competitive.
I know. So, if you share your bracket on social media, you will be entered to win a signed copy of Mindhunter from author John Douglas.
What?
I know.
That's a great prize.
It's a fantastic prize.
And all someone has to do is fill in their ballot and post it with the hashtag EPL March Madness.
That's right. Take a photo, share it on Twitter, even Instagram, Facebook as well. Just post it on there. So let's talk about our picks for this tournament, because before we start talking about it, it was a real challenge to determine what made the cut.
I think that it was really easy to identify maybe the top 4 or 5 frontrunners, and then afterwards everything is just subjective to what you yourself consumed or what you saw in your media, what you saw your friends consuming. So yeah, it was really hard to narrow down which of this list of 20 plus items were actually going to make it into the bracket.
Yeah, so one thing that we did take a look at is, obviously we reached out to EPL staff and we had a lot of suggestions from staff. And then what we did from there is we compiled this long list, and then we had another meeting where we sat down to try and determine what the final 16 should be for each category. Caroline, you were in that meeting with me. What were your thoughts going through the whole process?
My thoughts were very similar to what it was like when we recorded the March Madness episode last year, because March Madness 2019 was my very first episode co-hosting the podcast. So I came in, I had not worked on the bracket, but I filled it out, and I talk about this on the episode where I walk in going well, clearly these are the choices that everyone's picking. What are we going to talk about? These are obviously the selections. And it was just like that, where you walk in, you're like, well, I think it's clear that we've got this top 16 in each segment. And then it's like, oh, there's a lot of disagreement on this. And hearing people's reasons for why certain titles should be included, there were the times when I didn't have an opinion and was like very willing to lean on maybe someone else's expertise in the room in a certain area, then there were times where it's like, no, I disagree with this, but trying to figure out how to have a bracket that really represented the full decade.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, you had some great suggestions for this tournament. How hard was it for you to kind of come up with like a 16 list for each category to really take a look and say, these were the 16 best books of the 2010s?
It was really tough. Outside of books, I'm actually not super pop culture literate, which means on one half, and I'm probably the least competent person at this table. On the other hand, I'm also very objective and neutral. I largely chose my choices on cultural significance, but that was a tough one where, cultural significance butted up against personal enjoyment of things. And, and I realized, I maybe don't have good taste, but that is okay.
Just in case you're looking at the bracket and wondering, how did these guys come up with these titles? As Nancy mentioned, a lot of it was based on cultural impact of something. So maybe you'll see something on there that maybe, for example, Rick and Morty. I made a huge pitch for Rick and Morty.
Is this where we're going to talk about Rick and Morty?
We could maybe talk about it now, but we also kind of looked at cultural significance and popularity. So you'll see something like Game of Thrones is ranked number 1 in our TV category. I don't think too many people could really argue with that. Even something like Frozen in movies, that's where kind of some controversy comes in, whereas it wasn't the highest grossing movie of the last decade, but it made a huge impact.
The other criteria that we were working on with items was that it needed to be in our catalog.
Yeah.
So that took out some TV options, I would say, maybe more so than books, movies, or music. I still think we have a very strong bracket based on what we had, but there were some titles, especially from streaming services, that maybe haven't been available on a form of media that the library can acquire. So was there a certain title that you're upset didn't make the tournament? Nancy, I'll start with you.
No, actually, I somehow cleverly all my choices got in. It's that it's that sharp mind of mine that enabled child labor that just figure out how to game the system.
Yeah.
Maria, how about you?
I can be quite indecisive, so I was prepared to go back and forth on my choices a whole bunch of times, but there were a couple of things that I kind of got stuck on. I know one thing that we talked about when we were deciding what would end up in the bracket was whether our book category had some fair representation in it, so whether it had enough graphic novels or YA content, or if there was too much YA content. But one thing that just barely didn't make it into the book category was the picture book Go the F to Sleep, which I think was hilarious and also kind of stood in for this whole, I don't know if you can say it's a backlash, but this whole series of self-help books that came out in the past decade that are kind of more flippant about the idea of self-help. So they've got explicit titles or things like that. And you also don't just have a picture book for adults come out that has its audiobook read by Samuel L. Jackson and then just not talk about it. So I was a little bit sad that didn't make it.
Well, another one too along those lines that probably could have made it as well to the books category, as you mentioned, using the F word in the title, is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. Obviously, I read the book. I wasn't a huge fan, but if that title had made the books list, I don't think anybody could really disagree with that.
That's kind of where I ended up on most of these. Not all of the things that made it on here were on my short list of putting it together, but I there's not a lot that I strongly disagree with. I see why something has ended up on the list. I think for me, I wish there had been a way to get Big Little Lies onto the TV bracket.
Yeah, so that one might be my fault, though, because I what we behind the scenes here at EPL now call the Rick and Morty card, where I was adamant that Rick and Morty should be included in this tournament. Had they not been in this tournament, Big Little Lies would have been included in the TV. But I felt strongly that we needed some animated shows on that list. And also, too, like, even if you're not a big fan of the show, you see Rick and Morty merch everywhere. Go into an EB Games, you see like Pickle Rick stuff. There's going to be, actually it might even be out now, there's going to be a pickled flavor of Pringles based on the Pickle Rick character from Rick and Morty. So
I do love pickled flavored things. I might be coming around on this.
It sounds delicious.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And there's a whole thing too with Szechuan sauce at McDonald's. So Rick and Morty definitely has its fans, but I did feel a little bad about not being able to include Big Little Lies on there.
I think now I need to come clean on my Rick and Morty card,
Yeah.
which was my one that I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not accepting any argument on this. And that was Carly Rae Jepsen in the music category. Call Me Maybe was huge, and it deserved to be on this list. However, when we were putting it together, we got to a place where there were some really big artists, really like things that we just could not believe we didn't have a place for. And I started looking and I was like, oh, I think it's going to have to be Carly Rae. And I just would not let that happen. So there could be some omissions in the music section, possibly because of my Rick and Morty pick, Carly Rae Jepsen.
I'm with you, Caroline, on Call Me Maybe, though, because this is the best of the 2010s. And let's say 20 years from now, we look back, this might be the last decade in which we pick up the phone and call people. So I feel like it's emblematic of the decade. 20 years from now, it's going to be like, beam me maybe, hologram me maybe. So I stand by that choice.
I think that also in some ways points to something that we struggled a bit with music, which was originally we were thinking of it in terms of albums.
Yeah.
And we had the kind of conversation of, are albums still relevant? Because we had the songs, we had maybe the singles that we wanted to include on the list, but do you know? I don't know off the top of my head which album Call Me Maybe was on.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are Carly Rae fans who would be able to tell us, just as with something like some of the big albums, they were albums that we wanted to represent. But we went back and forth because for a long time we had Bruno Mars and Uptown Funk, which is actually on a Mark Ronson album. So if we just had album and artist, it would not have had Bruno Mars on the list at all.
That's right. It was tough because in the music category, I was kind of making a last minute pitch for Katy Perry. So Katy Perry, you could kind of make that argument with Carly Rae Jepsen, and it was, obviously it came down to Carly
I just
Rae
was
Jepsen.
not having it.
And that's fine. I went with Rick and Morty. I played my Rick and Morty card, and I was good with that. A couple titles for me, though, just one in the book category that I think I really wish we could have included, and a couple of people talked me out of it. That was The Girl on the Train. That book was everywhere. Now, I know you can kind of make the comparison, very similar to Gone Girl. Yeah, I can understand maybe now why we didn't include that one, but I felt like that should have been on there to represent the whole decade. And then also on TV, The Americans, I would have loved to have seen on there. And in movies, The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio. So that was, I also kind of thought too, maybe that should be included, but we have some strong contenders on that list anyway.
And it's so hard when we're thinking of 10 years, 16 titles. It's really just kind of doing one pass by at this. We weren't really able to go in deep, and as we're looking at pop culture kind of in general, the things that really made a big impact, it was tough to kind of think about what ultimately deserved a place on our list.
And to speak to what Bryce said, sometimes we picked a title based on it representing an entire genre. But of course, you know, you could pick and choose you can argue with us about what title best represented that genre.
Yeah, like the MCU conversation we had in movies around, you know, are we just going to stack this with 16 Marvel comic movies?
Oh yeah, that's the thing, because you'll see some really great movies like Wonder Woman isn't included on this list, and you can make the case why it should be. Guardians of the Galaxy, like there were so many great comic book movies over the last decade. Like we could have probably just had a top 16 of those, but just because of the impact that they made. So let's talk a little bit about these matchups that we see here in the tournament.
But just before we do that,
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Bryce, because so many March Madness-esque, but like voting things like this fail because the ballots are not properly seated. Most people will just slap on stuff any which way, and that's the number one reason why handmade March Madness tournaments do not work well. Bryce is excellent at seeding, and you take it very seriously.
I do, and it's funny because that's a giant pet peeve of mine. I won't call out other I guess media outlets, if you will, who do their own kind of version of this, but that's my biggest pet peeve when I see something kind of matched up, or I'm like, you did not properly rank these at all. So
Yeah.
we try and stay true to like the NCAA version of this tournament with our seeding. And I should say the reason and how we kind of came up with these different seedings for everything is I ranked them, Caroline ranked them, Maria did, Nancy. So what we did is we kind of once everybody ranked them, we basically had like an average score. So that's why you see things ranked a certain way. So looking at that first round, what was your toughest decision in that first round? Maria, when you filled yours out, what for you were you like, oh my God, why did we pit this title up against this other title?
My oh my God is kind of two parts. One of it because it was an actual struggle for me to decide, but the second part was they are going to mock me so hard for having trouble with this decision. But Rihanna versus Justin Bieber. And I'm not a huge Justin Bieber fan, but just thinking back to this past decade, we discussed whether it should be like the My World 2.0 album that went on here, or whether it was the quote-unquote Justin Bieber Renaissance album, which was Purpose, that should represent him on here. But when I was thinking back as to what was really popular in this past decade, I kept coming back to Justin Bieber because for such a long time his music was kind of something you were allowed to make fun of and listen to ironically and still enjoy. But then when Purpose came out, everyone kind of had to pause and go, wait a second, this music is actually kind of good, kind of enjoyable. So I was kind of metaphorically banging my head against the wall trying to decide between Rihanna and Justin Bieber. But, you know, ultimately Beyonce just destroyed the entire music category, so it wasn't that big of a deal in the end.
Caroline,
Yes.
I know I ran into you yesterday in the break room, and you were filling yours out, and you wouldn't let me see it.
I did not.
And what for you was one of the toughest picks in the first round?
I think it was the music as well. I think for me, it was Ed Sheeran and BTS.
Okay.
Because I know like BTS is one of, if not the biggest groups in the world right now.
Yeah, hands down.
And just their ability to be crossing over into North American audiences. They were on Saturday Night Live, like just their ability to cross over has just been incredible. Ed Sheeran has like an amazing number of number one songs. His music's been everywhere, from what you hear in a restaurant to a sporting event to a wedding reception. Like he's just everywhere, and so it was really, really tough. And I went with Ed Sheeran, and I don't know if that was right.
That's okay. I also picked Ed Sheeran in that category, but same thing too. I looked at that matchup and I was like, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of either of their music, Ed Sheeran or BTS, but I recognize the significance of what BTS is doing right now. So it did make it tough to pick Ed Sheeran in that matchup.
And there were a couple, and I'm not going to say which ones, but there were a couple matchups where I'm like, on this, and you just kind of go with one.
Yeah.
But then there were others where it's like, don't make me choose. Don't make me choose.
I strongly disagree with both of your choices in the Ed Sheeran versus BTS. I am Team BTS. Again, indifferent on the music, but I think BTS is really part of the Asian wave and the influence of Asian media that came in the 2010s, where I think rather than in the past where it was Western artists that dominated and influenced Asian music, you kind of see the flip side around. So boy bands all the way. 2010 was also a really good decade for boy bands. You have BTS, you have One Direction, whom I love, and I actually realized I never put on here, which is shocking to me. I'm going to hang my head in shame.
Well, it's funny about One Direction because I was in a meeting and somebody was just like, oh, is this person included in the tournament? This person? I was like, yep. And then it came to One Direction and I was like, nobody mentioned One Direction. Obviously, we kind of have the boy band category I kind of covered with BTS, but
not the same. This
It's
entire bracket is now irrelevant. One Direction.
Was there anything else for you in the first round?
For me, mine was in the movies category. I think the hardest for me was Inception versus Mad Max Fury Road. Mm-hmm. And I think that really came up on the personal enjoyment versus cultural significance. I enjoyed both movies. Inception really added the word incepted and inception into the vocabulary. Even to this day, you will still hear people say, that person incepted me or things like that. But Mad Max Fury Road is just such a good movie. It has, the action, it has the special effects, it has strong female characters that it was really tough.
Yeah, that one for me was the toughest. I had to fill out stuff around it first and then come back to that. I ended up taking Mad Max.
Oh yes,
but it was honestly it could have been a coin flip there. We joke around about Rick and Morty, but believe it or not, I love the show Breaking Bad. I love Rick and Morty. They're two totally different shows. I chose Breaking Bad, but it kind of broke my heart a little bit. I would love to see Rick and Morty advance. It won't against Breaking Bad, but I just enjoyed both shows, so it was hard to vote against one or the other in that category for me.
And you fought so hard to have it in the bracket, and
I did.
Got bumped out first round.
I know. I'm trying to think. Even if we had bumped it up to, then it would have been up against RuPaul's Drag Race, so that would have been a very interesting matchup, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the other things I just wanted to note about our selections was Parasite we had on the list prior to its Best Picture win.
That's right. If you're looking at this, we really should mention that, because if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, they just included Parasite because it won Best Picture. No, we did not.
It was one of the ones that was mentioned by a number of EPL staff when we were canvassing around what needed to be included on the list. And so when it came to assembling the bracket, it just had such a groundswell of support among EPL staff that we could not have it on the list.
We liked it before it was cool. Let's just put it that way.
So there are going to be some upsets. It's not a March Madness tournament unless there's some upsets. Which of the higher ranked items could you see getting knocked out in an early round?
I think this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I bumped out Frozen the first round because it's up against the last Harry Potter movie, and even though the last Harry Potter movie isn't necessarily a cinematic masterpiece, it stood for the end of an era. So when I thought back as to what was more significant to me in this past decade, it was definitely Harry Potter over Frozen. But Bryce, I feel like you should tell the people what was going to be in Harry Potter's place, because we had this discussion in terms of what should go in the place of this kind of big series capping movie.
Yeah, when we left the selection meeting, Harry Potter was not on the list.
Yeah, in the spot of where Harry Potter is, I was wondering if somebody was going to call me out on this. We had Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 in place of Harry Potter. Yeah, not sure. It's funny because I was like, no, it should be Twilight, and I had probably a very lame reason why I thought it should be on there. But then I went home that night and I didn't sleep very good. And I just got thinking about all the Twitter replies with like, why do you guys have Twilight on there over Harry Potter? And I tossed and turned, and I came in the morning. I fired off a quick email to everyone. I was like, hey, I know we agreed on Twilight, but we're making a huge mistake by putting it on there over Harry Potter.
Yeah. I think another one that I got hung up about, in that same vein, wherein it came to movies, we were thinking about series capping movies, but then also animated movies.
Mm-hmm.
And one that went back and forth in my mind between Harry Potter and a couple of the other ones we were talking about was Toy Story 3. Because Toy Story 3 was excellent, but it didn't actually end up making the bracket.
No, it came very close. And it was nominated for Best Picture. Toy Story 4, by the way, is an excellent movie, but really Toy Story 3 should have been the cap of the series, though.
I have to say, I slept fine knowing we had put Twilight on the list. So I guess Twitter, come at me, but I was fine with either.
Nancy, do you have something that you could see a big upset with in the first round?
Yeah, I can see two. So in the movies category, I can see Bridesmaids being knocked out pretty early, which is surprising to me because it was a really strong movie in the decade. It kind of kicked off that wave of female-led comedies that led to Pitch Perfect, that led to the remake of Ghostbusters, things like that. But it's up against Black Panther, which was also a very definitive movie.
Yeah,
And
Bridesmaids ended up with a low seating.
Yeah, and then in music, Drake versus Kendrick Lamar, I think whoever gets knocked out there is going to be a upset.
I was in a marketing meeting yesterday, and some people were just kind of asking me about some of the matchups. And they were like, oh, who's Drake up against in the first round? And I mentioned Kendrick Lamar, and I had some 4-letter words tossed my way. They're like, how could you put those two up against each other in the first round? How can we pick? So, yeah, that's going to be a really interesting matchup when people actually get to vote on that one anyway.
The lovely thing about March Madness is that I could see anything happening. So I could see really any of our big picks going, especially with the social media element. If something catches on, if it gets a wave of support around something, I don't think I had any particularly shocking choices around the higher seeds on our list, but yeah, I think anything could happen.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Maria said about Frozen versus Harry Potter in the first round. That, for me, I think is, like, if there is a big upset, I think that's going to be it in the first round, just based on people who are voting. So, of course, it's on social media, so it's mostly going to be adults. If you're a parent, you probably want to poke your eyes out before having to watch that movie again, I'm guessing. So we could see a lot of people going with Harry Potter for that very reason. In the books category as well, you kind of have young adult up against an adult thriller in The Fault in Our Stars versus Big Little Lies. We have a 3 seed there versus 14th for Big Little. I could see Big Little Lies knocking that one off, just because it's not included in maybe in the TV category.
I was just looking again at my list, and I do have Big Little Lies taking Fault in Our Stars, so I completely agree.
Ooh, I do not.
No, Fault in
I
Our
am
Stars.
a big YA.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Maria and I will defend YA.
Yes. Another one that I was sad to see paired together was actually Smile versus The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, because I thought that the Marie Kondo book was a shoo-in for having had a big effect on our kind of stance on cleaning and self-help. This past decade has its own TV show and everything, but if you worked in a library branch, you have 100% seen the graphic novel Smile before. And I feel like almost every single child I've interacted with in this past decade has also either read this book or seen this book or heard someone talk about this book. It was a YRCA pick. It's just so good. And now if you look at the top children's books that are being borrowed from the library right now, a good chunk of them are graphic novels that are kind of these everyday stories. And Raina Telgemeier is such a big name because she's written so many other great books since that I was surprised that I even had to choose between the two in round one.
Yeah, even like it's interesting when you brought that up, especially with the life-changing magic of tidying up. You've seen really over the last decade, probably even more so the last 5 years, this notion of minimalizing everything, moving into like one of those smaller houses, and it's really made a huge cultural impact over the last few years. So let's find out who everyone had in their final four and who you had winning. Maria, I'm very excited to hear what you've got picked here.
All right. Don't hate me for these because these were also very much influenced by what I enjoyed as well as what I thought was culturally significant. But for books, I had The Hate You Give topping everything out. Movies, it was Get Out. For TV, it was Game of Thrones versus Drag Race towards the end. And although I love Drag Race and I think it's made a huge impact on kind of people's ability to accept LGBTQ plus content in main media, and I just absolutely love that show, but I think Game of Thrones was really the sweep of that category, and for music it was obviously Beyonce. But I ended up giving the win to Get Out. I think it was super significant this past decade for a whole bunch of different reasons. I remember that in the Oscar snubs category, you and Caroline did talk about how horror is often kind of overlooked when it comes to the Academy Awards. And even just looking at the movies category, I was hoping that we could include more horror in it because we had a couple of titles like It Follows and Hereditary, and I brought up The Babadook as well, that were really, really great pictures, but we weren't sure if they had enough of a following to actually make a big impact on the bracket. But Get Out was kind of Jordan Peele's debut as a horror director from how we all knew him as the funny man in Key and Peele, and it was such an interesting take on horror, and it was such a significant commentary about kind of like the experiences of Black people in North America that I thought that it deserved the win.
That's cool.
So
nice.
in your final matchup, do you have Get Out versus Beyonce?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know that
choice.
was a hard choice.
Yeah.
You're going to be mad at me. I have Get Out losing to John Wick in the first round.
What?
No.
I know, but John Wick was huge, Keanu Reeves. But I get, like, you've now sold me on that, so I have to go back and adjust my bracket now.
All right.
I have it losing to Parasite, and
That was a tough choice for
Yeah.
me too. Yeah.
Nancy,
Yeah.
what does your final four look like?
My final four is number one in books. It is the life-changing magic of tidying up. I think the 2010s were really a decade where spiritually, emotionally, physically, we're full of junk. Our politics is full of junk. Our climate is full of junk. Let's just get rid of it. So I think it's really, really emblematic of that, although I've never read the book and I personally never clean. So as an individual, it made no impact on me. But I think, definitely represents the decade very well. In movies, Avengers Endgame. It was really the decade of the superhero. And yeah, all the Marvel movies collectively are equivalent to Beyonce. Like, right? They're just like indomitable. In music, I actually picked Taylor Swift. I think, and I know that people will disagree with this, but I think Beyonce is very evergreen. She was big in the previous decade. She'll be big in the upcoming decade. Whereas I very much see Taylor Swift's star as, again, representing the 2010s. And you'll see that a lot in why I picked what I picked. For example, I think 1989 was the best album of the decade. I think the focus on Swift's relationships and her self-image and the way she presents to the media was talked about so much in this decade that it really, for me, kind of marked a change in how we engage with celebrities and celebrity culture. And she's been very, very consistent in delivering great music. And then in TV, funny enough, my last two came down to the same as Maria's, Game of Thrones versus Drag Race, but I went for Drag Race.
Nice.
I think, Game of Thrones was definitely the most popular, but I think Drag Race has changed things both in the way that people engage with the LGBT community, and the LGBT community engages with the broader world, and I think it's like literally changed people's minds on things versus Game of Thrones, which is very enjoyable, but I don't see as having that same social impact.
I think another plus for Drag Race as well is that it's been ongoing this entire decade. Like there's 11 seasons of it now.
It actually started prior to this decade.
Yeah.
This is a whole other discussion.
Which was something we had to talk about in the selection meeting.
It's just been gaining momentum this entire time, and it's still funny, it's still relevant, it's great.
So what's your final then, and who did you have winning?
Life-changing magic of tidying up.
Ooh.
Wow.
I know, just because I think the number of people I heard talking about it, or talking about its concepts, or really kind of talking about how they need to minimalize, downsize, purge, cleanse, insert whatever verb you want, I think it was really, like, looking back, the 2010s, I think we were all extremely, extremely neurotic. I'm not saying we won't be going forward, but I think that, for me, was the top.
That's an interesting pick. I wouldn't have guessed that winning, but you saw that book absolutely everywhere over the last few years, so totally understandable. And
the view I always take is, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, alien archaeologists have descended to Earth. Humanity is wiped out, but they have the records of what we produced. And I think that somewhere, the Martian's going to pick up, not the Martian as in the movie or the book, an alien anthropologist who also happens to be a Martian will be like, wow, humans were really obsessed with cleaning.
And then they'll see the Pickle Rick figure next to it. Go, this is odd. What is this?
Did this spark joy?
Yeah. Caroline, how about you?
Before I share my final four, I just have to say that in addition to my Rick and Morty card, I also had a very personal, what I call my endgame card, which is, this is probably the choice to make, but I cannot bring myself to vote for it.
Okay.
And so I think, between Infinity War and Endgame, I watched every single Marvel MCU movie, and I was so underwhelmed by Endgame that I could not vote for it.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, because I actually had, when we were ranking these, I had Endgame as my number one movie of the decade.
And mine was quite a bit lower.
Yes.
And so this, but I get it. I absolutely do. I mean, I sat down and watched the whole series of movies, I think, as the cap to it. If we had gone with Avengers 1, like the Avengers movie, I probably would have moved that much further along. I don't have it going. I didn't vote for it. So we'll see how that plays out, and if other people feel like I do.
Well, neither did I. I had Parasite beating it in the first round too, because we talked about this in our bracket making meeting, that if we were to have one movie represent the MCU, I would have preferred it be Black Panther.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so different from like what I would consider the main stream of the MCU that I do see them as. I'm glad that we had the Avengers movie and Black Panther's two separate entries.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're quite comparable.
Yeah.
It's and I definitely didn't have a cohesive picking strategy for my selections. There were the times where I had my personal favorite. There are the times when I was like, this is the one the public is going to vote for. This is the one that captures the decade. This is the one that's more important to me. This is the one I want to set up for the next round. Like I was all over the place in my selections, so I own that.
Yeah.
But to get to the final four, I had Smile in books.
Yes.
And I had Black Panther in movies. Last year in the books to film category, I had Black Panther going all the way. So as soon as I started filling it out, I was like, oh, hello again. Yeah. Let's do this.
Nothing if not consistent.
Exactly. In music, I had Beyonce, and TV. This was probably my longest shot. I have Schitt's Creek.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
CanCon for the win.
Yeah, so in the final, I had Black Panther facing off against Beyonce, and I gave it to Beyonce.
Wow, that's a pretty good pick. So for mine, for books, I had Gone Girl winning it. I know, big shock. I took the first place book and had it going through. But
but you were really in your heart voting for The Girl on the Train.
I totally was. I totally was. But you know what? I loved Gone Girl. It seemed like everybody read that book, and of course the movie was great as well. We didn't include it in this tournament, but I felt like it kind of represented a lot of other kind of books of that genre kind of coming out of the decade. Movies, of course, I also had Avengers Endgame coming out of it. I thought it was... the last movie was a little long, I will admit that, but it was really cool to see everybody kind of come together in that last movie. It was a great way to wrap up this over 20 movie kind of collection that really helped define the 2010s.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
I know this is very rude, but I actually want to say that because we haven't yet talked about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is another Marvel movie that's in the movie bracket, and I personally think is the best of all of the Marvel cinematic universe. And so I just wanted to put that there.
You know what? That's fair. Actually, you know what? I did enjoy Spider-Man actually more than Avengers Endgame, but I was kind of looking at it like, okay, best of the decade, and I just thought kind of to wrap everything up, I went with Avengers, but I agree. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I'm really curious to see how it does against Crazy Rich Asians, but that's
one
a tough,
breaks my heart.
That's a tough matchup.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was sad to see those two paired.
TV, I had Game of Thrones winning, and in music, I had Beyonce. In my final, I had Avengers going up against Game of Thrones, and in the final, I took Game of Thrones to win. The reason I went with Game of Thrones, Caroline, I know you didn't really watch the show.
That is correct.
But it seemed like everybody was watching it. Everybody was talking about it. People who don't normally watch fantasy or that sort of series, they were invested in it. I had a friend who is not into that stuff at all, and he's like, I don't know what to watch now that Game of Thrones is over. Bryce, what else is like Game of Thrones that I can watch? So
if only there was a place that could tell me, if you like one thing, maybe what else would I like?
Yeah, is there an institution here in Edmonton that can help me with that? But I just thought I went with Game of Thrones just because no matter how you feel about the finale, and I know a lot of people are torn on it and aren't big fans, between people wanting more books and then just the TV show that had everybody watching it, I thought that really properly represented the decade, and that's what got my pick for the win.
Yeah, I had Game of Thrones going all the way to the Elite Eight. Is that the correct?
Elite Eight is correct.
Thank you. I've been practicing, and where I made the decision to go with Schitt's Creek.
Nice.
So we will see.
I wonder how many marriages, friendships, and everything just sitting around talking about Game of Thrones over the water cooler has made. Like, it was definitely one where, if I threw a rock into a crowd, I could probably hit a lot of people. I mean, physics-wise, you could probably only hit one or two people with a rock. But your chances of finding someone who is also eager to talk about Game of Thrones was also very high. So I think, again, that social impact was, inarguable.
Yeah, after the finale aired, there was a bunch of us in marketing. We all had to go to lunch together to talk about the finale and what we thought of it, and it did bring a lot of people together.
Which also happened with Big Little Lies. I want to be invited to these marketing debrief lunches.
That's right. We have these debrief lunches after a series ends and to talk about it.
This sounds amazing. I want to be invited.
You'll be invited to the next one.
Okay. So we're coming to the end of today's episode. Bryce, before we get to the roundtable questions, can you let everyone know what we'll be chatting about on our next episode, which will be available on Friday, March 20th?
Yeah, Caroline, today we talked a lot about movies, we talked about TV, we talked about books and music, and we just slightly touched on video games and how we kind of thought, like, we would have loved to include video games in this tournament, but we just couldn't make it work. So in our next episode, we, of course, are going to be diving into the best video games of the 2010s. From Fortnite to Candy Crush. Caroline, I know you're a fan of Candy Crush.
I am.
Minecraft to Mario. We'll explore the games that we just couldn't put down. And we have a couple of first-time guests joining us. One of my colleagues from marketing, Sam Hamilton. She's a big gamer. She'll be joining us. And librarian Mike Eaton, who has really helped us in past episodes come up with titles that we should talk about. So I'm really excited to have both Sam and Mike join us.
I'm really looking forward to it. I know that I have a lot of questions about different games, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspectives on it.
Mm-hmm. So let's move into our round table questions. Nancy, what would you like to see be the theme of next year's March Madness tournament? Do you want me to come back to you?
Yes, please.
All right, Maria.
I was thinking while we were going through all of our book picks how I could fill out an entire bracket with just children's and YA content. So I thought an interesting one might be the best of childhood classics, because we have our modern ones, but then we have also things that you call back to, like Peter Pan or Winnie the Pooh or Harry Potter. I think that might make for an interesting set of matchups.
Yeah, I'd have Charlie and the Chocolate Factory going the whole way to win, but that would be a really fun tournament, actually. Definitely playing up that everybody loves nostalgia. So I think that could create some interesting conversations. So that's a great idea. Nancy.
I think that we should definitively settle what is the best superhero movie. You know, we've kind of circled around it in this conversation.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about it, but let's just put it to the test.
Yeah. There's got to be 64 titles for us to choose from.
Easily.
Yeah, easily.
If we go back, if we have like the original Superman.
Yeah. The 80s Batman, 60s Batman. Batman might even have its own bracket on there.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah. By the time you get like all the because there was a Batman movie in the 60s.
Yeah, the Adam West version started off as a movie. Yeah.
And then, Michael Keaton, George Clooney.
That's weird. Everybody's favorite Batman, George Clooney, would make an appearance.
I think, I like this idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Caroline, what would you love us to do next year?
I would like to see maybe Canadian titles. I go back and forth because there was something, really exciting about kind of like for my Final Four matching up Smile and Black Panther and Schitt's Creek and Beyonce and just having the different experiences of the different media forms and artists. But I think it might be easier if we stuck to one single form like movies or children's books. So I'm going to say maybe Canadian books.
Okay, cool. That would be an interesting to see who would come out and how we would split up those brackets and everything. So I like that.
How about you?
Mine was actually, I think this one was on the short list for this year. This was the perfect year to do best of the 2010s, obviously. But I would love us to do like a heroes versus villains, like a best character matchup. So, we have maybe Pennywise the Clown taking on Charlie Bucket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Imagine that matchup. That'd be crazy. So
Charlie would win.
Charlie would definitely.
All those magical chocolate things in his arsenal.
That's right. He'd have the Oompa Loompas working with him to defeat Pennywise. It would be a great matchup.
I like that.
Yeah.
And that's something that's such a classic reality TV thing of Survivor will go to heroes versus villains.
Yeah.
And I think that would be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, in your opinion, what would be the most shocking winner of this year's March Madness tournament? Caroline, for you, you'd be like, what? Who is stuffing the ballots here?
I feel kind of mean saying this, but I think it's Rick and Morty. If Rick and Morty made it all the way, I at some point during that, I would just be like, I gotta give it to them, but I would be shocked.
Those Rick and Morty fans are enthusiastic. I was joking around about this yesterday in our marketing department that on Twitter, Rick and Morty fans are hardcore. So if they caught wind of this,
Yep.
who knows?
If it can last longer than Breaking Bad, I think it will go all the way.
It very well could.
But that's my
but
pick.
Rick and Morty fans' attention spans aren't that long either way. So it might accidentally beat Breaking Bad, but the next round it could be done for.
Anyway, that's
Maria,
my-
how about you? What would be the most shocking?
If you're talking about hardcore fandoms, you should never, ever underestimate the power of K-pop fandoms. Because I could see BTS's international fan base just accidentally stumbling across this on Twitter and taking everything else down.
Yeah.
So watch out for those armies, because I think that BTS could accidentally sweep this entire competition.
That would be wild. And you know what? You could make a strong case about like why BTS could deserve to win this thing.
Yeah.
We joke around about Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty doesn't deserve to win. I'm glad it's included. But
Fiery opinions
yeah,
here.
And that's from the player of the Rick and Morty card.
That's right. I admit it probably does not deserve to win this tournament, but something like BTS, you could definitely make a case for.
Yeah.
Nancy, what would be the biggest upset that if they won this thing?
I'm with Maria, BTS. I think, as an Asian, let me tell you, there are a lot of Asians out there on social media, and I could definitely see, a 16-year-old from Korea being like, oh, and then all of a sudden just blows up with the votes. But another one, I think, and we've talked about how, maybe we gave Big Little Lies kind of the short end of the stick by putting it in books, but I think even if it were in TV, it wouldn't get that far. I would be surprised if Big Little Lies got that far.
Yeah.
Period.
No. For me, the biggest upset of the tournament, if this person won, I would just be absolutely floored. This would be a bigger upset than Rick and Morty. If Eric Church was to somehow come out of this, first of all, let alone beat Beyonce in the first round, there's a lot of country fans out there. Eric Church sells out stadiums. If, the country music fan community out there really caught wind of this, who knows?
Versus the Beehive? I know.
I know. I mean, like I said, Beyonce would win, but to me, the most shocking one out of this would be Eric Church making it out of there and winning this thing.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy and Maria. Before we go, do you have anything that you'd like to plug to our listeners?
I guess I should say that since Enterprise Square is currently downsizing, the Literacy Van is taking over some of their downtown visits. So we've got a sing sign that's going to be happening on Mondays in the Citadel Theater, actually, and a baby lap time that's going to be happening on Thursday afternoons at the Alberta Art Gallery. So if you're looking for
Fancy.
I'm excited to see what kind of cool programming spaces we get to use. But if you're looking for some children's programming that's still in the downtown core, you can find it. And if you want to find out where else the Literacy Van is doing its programs, you can always check the calendar on the EPL website.
Great. So you can go to epl.ca to find out all that information.
Absolutely. Nancy, anything coming up that listeners should be aware of?
I'm really excited by a lot of cool classes that we're running using EPL's various Cricut cutters. So that's CRICUT. Several branches have them, not all, but several, and they're running classes where you can make your own vinyls, decals, stickers. So again, check it out at epl.ca, but they're really, really cool.
Yeah, I've seen some of the images of some of the flowers that people have been creating, obviously, for Milner Library here. There's lots of really cool stuff going on right now.
And I've described it as it's so easy, even Caroline can do it. So
I might have to take that challenge because I am not good at that stuff. So we'll see. Maybe I'll try and make my own Cricut flower. So as we mentioned at the top of the show, we would love for our listeners to share their picks with us on social media. So right now, you can download your own tournament bracket at epl.ca/podcast. Fill in that bracket, take a photo of it, and post it to social media, and use the hashtag EPL March Madness, and you will be entered to win that signed copy of Mindhunter from author John Douglas. It's incredible.
it's just really exciting.
Now, it's funny because I would have made the pitch to include Mindhunter in our TV category. We unfortunately don't have it in our collection. It's just on Netflix, but You can get the next best thing by getting a signed copy by the man himself. And of course, starting on Sunday, March 1st, go to our social media channels on Twitter and on Facebook and vote for your favorite titles. I will preview this if you're listening to this on February 28th. Our first matchup will be Gone Girl versus I'll Be Gone in the Dark.
Gone versus Gone.
I know. How creepy is that?
What a gong show.
Yeah.
So we hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't yet, we encourage you to subscribe so that you automatically get new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and more importantly, tell a friend about the show. Get them voting in March Madness.
Get them voting, get them to share their bracket as well. So don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in our show notes today. We'd love to hear from our listeners, and you can reach us on Facebook or on Twitter at epl.ca, or email us at podcast@epl.ca. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Pew, pew, pew.